The park cafe shimmered with golden chandeliers, soft jazz filling the air as the city's elite sipped on expensive lattes. Waiters in crisp uniforms moved swiftly between tables, catering to whispered conversations and clinking glasses. Outside, beneath the dim glow of a street lamp, Jaden Carter stood, his hoodie pulled tight against the cold. He wasn't welcome here. The polished floors, the fine china, the people inside, none of it belonged to him. But his sharp eyes missed nothing. Through the glass, he spotted Richard Lawson, a powerful businessman, engrossed in his phone. Across from him sat Vanessa Lawson, her beauty effortless, her every move calculated. But then, something shifted. Jaden's breath hitched. Her manicured fingers slipped beneath the table, emerging with a small vial. In one swift motion, she poured its contents into Richard's soup, stirring it lightly as her lips curled into a practiced smile. Jaden's pulse pounded. He had seen hunger, theft, even violence on the streets, but this? His stomach twisted. Should he say something? Would anyone even listen to a boy like him? He took a step forward, then stopped. Because sometimes, the wrong words could cost everything. The Park Café wasn't just a restaurant, it was a statement. A sanctuary for the powerful, where conversations shaped deals worth millions. The polished wood floors gleamed under the golden light, the air thick with the scent of espresso and wealth. At a corner table, Richard Lawson scrolled through his phone, his expression unreadable. A man like him never truly relaxed, even over dinner. His tailored suit, the gleaming watch on his wrist, every detail screamed power. Across from him, Vanessa Lawson was the picture of elegance. Her dress, a shade too perfect. Her posture, just stiff enough. To an outsider, she was the devoted wife. But something in her eyes betrayed her, something that didn't quite match the warmth in her voice. Beyond the glass walls, Jaden Carter remained invisible. A homeless teen, just another shadow on the street. But while the cafe's patrons overlooked him, he saw everything. He always did. Tonight, the air inside was light with laughter, but for Jaden, it was thick with something else. Something dangerous. Because he had just witnessed something no one else had. And now, he had a choice to make. Jaden's fingers curled into fists. His stomach growled, a painful reminder of the hunger gnawing at him, but he barely noticed. His eyes stayed locked on Vanessa. He had seen people lie before. He had seen desperation, seen people steal to survive. But this was different. This wasn't about survival. This was planned. Calculated. Vanessa's movements were smooth, practiced. She leaned in toward Richard, her lips barely moving as she whispered something. Whatever she said, it made Richard pause, if only for a second, before he went back to his phone. She smiled, but her eyes remained cold. Jaden swallowed hard. He should walk away. This wasn't his problem. He had enough of his own. Who would believe a homeless kid over a woman like her? Someone who belonged in this world, who looked like she had never known a day of struggle. But the memory of that vial, the way her fingers moved so effortlessly, stayed with him. Richard sighed, set his phone down, and finally reached for his spoon. Jaden's breath caught in his throat. If he was going to do something, it had to be now. Panic hit Jaden like a fist to the chest. If he didn't act now, Richard Lawson would die. Right here. Right in front of him. His body moved before his mind caught up. His feet slammed against the pavement, shoving through the cafe doors. The warmth inside hit him like a wave, but there was no time to think about that. Don't eat that. His voice cut through the hum of conversation, turning heads. The cafe fell silent. Jaden's chest heaved, his pulse thundering in his ears. All eyes were on him now. Waiters froze, customers stared, and somewhere, a glass clinked against the table. Richard's hand stopped mid-air, the spoon inches from his lips. His brows pulled together as he turned toward the source of the disruption. Vanessa moved first. Her reaction was flawless, too flawless. Her face twisted in shock, then fear, then something almost heartbreaking. Oh my God. She put a hand to her chest. Who is this? Someone call security. Her voice trembled, just enough to sell it. Jaden shook his head. She put something in your soup. I saw her. A few gasps rippled through the cafe. Whispers. Uneasy glances. Richard's expression darkened. His gaze flickered from Jaden to Vanessa, then back to the soup. The silence stretched, thick with uncertainty. Vanessa let out a shaky breath, standing. Please, she pleaded, voice soft, this boy, he's confused. He's not well. She took a step toward Richard, her hand brushing his. A comforting gesture. A practiced one. Jaden clenched his fists. He could see it happening, how easily they would believe her over him. But he couldn't back down now. Because if he did, Richard Lawson would be dead before the night was over. For a moment, nobody spoke. The weight of Jaden's accusation hung in the air like thick smoke. Then, Vanessa shot to her feet, her chair scraping against the polished floor. He's lying. Her voice was sharp, laced with just the right amount of indignation. Her eyes darted around, searching the faces in the cafe. Some patrons shifted uncomfortably, others whispered behind their hands. Jaden stood his ground, his pulse hammering in his ears. This boy, she gestured at him, her lips curling in disgust, is just a street kid looking for attention. Jaden clenched his fists. His clothes were dirty, his shoes worn, but that didn't mean he was lying. I saw you, he said, voice shaking but firm. I saw you pour something into his soup. Vanessa scoffed, letting out a humorless laugh. Oh, this is absurd. Richard, please. She turned to her husband, reaching for his hand. You're not actually entertaining this nonsense, are you? Richard hadn't touched his soup. His spoon rested on the napkin beside him, forgotten. His sharp blue eyes weren't on Jaden, though. They were on his wife. Vanessa faltered. She recovered quickly, lifting her chin. Call the manager, she ordered a passing waiter. I want him out of here. A few customers exchanged uncertain glances. Others kept watching. No one moved. Jaden swallowed hard. Please, he said, his voice lower now, but insistent. Just don't eat it. The doubt in Richard's expression deepened. Richard stared at the soup. The golden broth swirled gently in the bowl, steam rising in delicate wisps. It looked normal. But normal didn't mean safe. Something about Jaden's voice, his eyes, raw, desperate, unsettled him. Slowly, Richard reached for the bowl and brought it closer. He lifted it slightly, sniffing. His brow furrowed. Vanessa, he said, his voice calm but firm. What's going on? Her reaction was immediate. She let out a sharp laugh, shaking her head. Are you serious? You're actually listening to him? Richard didn't respond. Vanessa's face darkened. You trust some dirty kid off the streets over me? Your wife. Jaden took a step forward. I have no reason to lie, he said. I don't even know you. His voice cracked, but he didn't care. I just know what I saw. A hush settled over the cafe. A few customers leaned in, their curiosity turning into concern. Vanessa's hands curled into fists. Richard, this is ridiculous. Just eat your soup in. No. The word came out cold. Firm. Vanessa's breath hitched. Richard's gaze didn't waver. His mind raced, memories flashing like fragments of a puzzle clicking into place. The way she had insisted on ordering for him. The way she had barely touched her own plate. The way her hand had hovered just a second too long over his bowl. Tell me the truth, Vanessa, he said. Right now. Her mask cracked. Just a little. But enough. Jaden watched as Richard's fingers slowly tightened around the spoon, no longer to eat, but as if gripping onto a truth he couldn't ignore. Vanessa's calm, poised exterior shattered. How dare you? She screamed, her voice shrill, cutting through the tense silence. "You've insulted me, humiliated me in front of everyone." Her chest heaved with emotion as she glared at Richard, her eyes wild with anger. "I'm your wife. How can you believe him over me?" Richard didn't move. His mind spun, recalling small, odd things he had ignored before, moments that didn't sit right, but seemed insignificant at the time. The way she'd been oddly distant lately. The subtle shifts in her mood. The strange phone calls she'd taken, always in private. The way she'd insisted on overseeing every detail of his meals when, before, he'd never cared. Suddenly, all the little cracks in their marriage were wide open, and he was seeing them for the first time. He looked at the soup again, his hand hovering just above the bowl, but he made no move to drink it. Vanessa took a deep breath, trying to regain control, her face reddened with rage. "This is ridiculous." She stood, walking toward him with deliberate steps, her heels clicking sharply on the floor. "You've gone too far. I'm not playing your games." But as she approached, she saw the shift in the crowd. Whispers. Glances turned her way, then away again. The cafe's atmosphere had changed. Where before people had been neutral or sympathetic, now they began to murmur under their breath, eyes flicking from her to Jaden. The truth was slowly taking root, and Vanessa felt it. The walls were closing in. Richard's jaw tightened as he stood up from the table, his voice steady but firm. "Call the staff. Test the soup. Now." Vanessa's face paled. She had hoped that the situation would blow over, but now, the truth was about to be exposed, and she could feel the walls crashing in around her. "You can't do this," she hissed, panic rising in her voice. She took a step back, her gaze darting toward the exit. "I need to leave. This is all a misunderstanding." But Richard wasn't listening. He waved over a waiter, who hurried over at his command. The cafe's manager arrived quickly, standing nervously as Richard demanded that the soup be tested. Vanessa's eyes flicked between them, desperation and fear setting in. She took another step back, her hand reaching for her purse as if to leave, to escape before it was too late. But she was too late. A customer, who had been watching the scene unfold, had already dialed the police. The waiter turned to Richard, then to Vanessa. "We've called the authorities," he said quietly. Vanessa froze. Her blood ran cold as the realization hit. "You don't have to do this," she whispered, her voice breaking. It was over. The police arrived minutes later, their presence final. As they approached, Vanessa's calm facade crumbled entirely, and her carefully constructed life began to fall apart in front of her eyes. As the police led Vanessa away in handcuffs, Richard turned to Jaden, who had remained standing at the edge of the crowd, unnoticed by many until now. "Thank you," Richard said, his voice full of gratitude and disbelief. "You saved my life." Jaden looked at him, his expression unreadable. He wasn't the invisible street kid anymore. In that moment, he was seen. A young man who had changed the course of a life, just by telling the truth. Richard offered a smile, but Jaden looked away, his eyes tired, his life on the streets a world away from the luxury of the cafe. But at that moment, he had something more important than anything money could buy. He had a place in the world. The cafe's patrons, once quick to judge him, now looked at him with new respect. The lesson was clear: kindness and truth had no social status. In that one, single moment, Richard had learned more than he could have ever imagined about the world he thought he knew. His wealth, his power, they didn't matter in this instance. Racism and prejudice had blinded him, as it had everyone in the cafe, until Jaden stepped forward and showed them the truth. And, for the first time, Richard understood, sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones with the most money or status, they're the ones willing to stand up, even when no one else will.